Okay, quiet.
Let's see, you're not married yet.
No. We each took a day off from Mare Island. Maybe you'd actually been released, I don't know. And we went to San Francisco. But we stopped in Berkeley at the stake patriarch's house, and he gave Stan a special blessing. And he, as we came in, and he greeted us, and we, we'd made an appointment with him. And as we went in, he said, "You're married now, aren't you?" And we said, "No." And his face fell. And we thought, oh, he's not going to let me stay in there where he gives him the blessing, is what I thought. And then as he talked, I realized that he thought we ought to get married. And that confirmed our decision, just for me. But then we went to San Francisco, and I don't know, we fooled around, and we bought my engagement ring, and we went to a penny arcade, and it was they had one of these booths where you could go and they'd make a headline story on the front page of a newspaper. And we had that newspaper for years, but I suppose it got lost when we went to Bell Springs. That said, "Stan and Irene engaged."
Oh.
And when we went home, I guess it was Friday or Saturday, whatever, and we went to, it was a ward dance that we went to, and we were just dancing with everybody like we always do, and this was our agreement. And I had his class ring on over my engagement ring. And about half of the old married men I danced with looked at my hand, and I'd say, "No, it's his class ring," and they'd say, "Oh, shucks," because they knew he was going. I guess you had to report Monday to the service. And then about halfway through the dance, we arranged for my little brother to come in with 3 or 4 newspapers yelling, "Extra, extra, read all about it." And that's how we announced our engagement.
And they sent me, after I was in the Army, they sent me to Keesler Field, Mississippi, where all of the insects dwell.
Congregate.
They have chiggers, little tiny things you can't hardly see.
Zero bites.
That sink in that chew into your flesh and suck blood, and boy do they itch. I had my basic training down there, which wasn't very fun. And Grandma was queen of the Golden Green Ball. And here I was down in Mississippi.
So this is the end of January, and the Golden Green Ball was in February.
And there was just no way that I could get leave to go back up to Vallejo and be with her when she was queen of the Golden Green Ball.
So the bishop appointed an escort for me. I don't remember his name. A bachelor, old bachelor. He wasn't part of the gang at all.
From there, after this basic training, they sent me to Greeley, Colorado. We're there where the college is.
Colorado State.
Yeah, Colorado. And we were going to school right in those classrooms there at the college. And that was real nice. We'd have breakfast, and these girls would wait on us, and it was really neat. And I learned how to be an engineering and operations clerk. That engineering and operations is keep track of the airplanes that are flying and so forth. After that, I was transferred to, well, you came to visit.
Yeah. I got a week's leave, and Mother didn't feel like she could get away because she was home with Newell most of the time, with Dad working, where Marjorie Ann was at home at Stan's house, along with, everybody else. So Grandma Knight and I came back and went to Greeley for a few days, and we stayed with the lady missionaries that were there. He arranged for that. But we haven't said anything about Kenneth. But Kenneth was in the reformatory that was up in Ogden.
Reform school for bad kids.
And so she went all the way to Colorado with me, but she only stayed one night or two. And then she got on the train and came to Ogden so she could go see Kenneth. And so I was alone with the lady missionaries, and I went tracting with him. And I thought that was really, well, I was terrified. I was afraid they were going to ask me to do some of the talking.
The lady missionaries tried to talk us into getting married then and there.
But, the only place I remember now about tracting, we went to one house where there was, excuse me, an older slovenly woman that had a fire going, and she had a bucket for coal that they used to call a coal scuttle sitting there. And all the time the lady missionaries were talking to her, she was chewing tobacco and spitting in the coal scuttle. But then he managed to get away for a few hours, and we went on the train together up to Cheyenne, where I had to change trains, and he was able to stay there long enough for me to get on the train, and then he went back to Greeley. And when we got to Ogden, his mother was waiting there, and we went on back to Vallejo together.
After Greeley, after I graduated from there, why, they sent me to Salt Lake. And we were housed out there at the state fairgrounds. And I was going to school up at the business college and learned to be an intelligence clerk. In that job, you would prepare maps and things like that to show the bomber, those flying bombers, how to get to targets and so forth. And then when they would come back, why, we would interrogate them. That means to question them about the fighters they met, the anti-aircraft guns, whether they thought the bombs had hit where they aimed, and so forth. So from Salt Lake, Dalhart, Texas, where I was actually in a bomb group, flying bomb. I didn't fly bombers, B-17s, and I couldn't bear to be separated from Grandma, so.
And we haven't told him about the saga of getting the trips of getting married yet.
Oh, you tell me.
And I don't remember where you came from to go there. That was from Dalhart.
Dalhart.
Yeah. I got a telegram from him saying, I'm going to get shipped overseas. I think we ought to get married before I go. Well, it wasn't that easy during World War II. you couldn't just go to your boss and say, I want 2 weeks leave, or 3 days leave, or whatever it was going to take. You had to make arrangements ahead, and it had to be approved on all up, even the admiral had to approve it. And he had to send a receipt showing that he had paid the rent and we had a place to live before they'd release me from Mare Island.
Oh, you're kidding. So, since you're working for the military, you just couldn't...
Yeah. I couldn't just up and go. But anyway, we agreed that we would meet at Aunt Sue's in Ogden. This is my mother's sister. The weekend of about the 10th and 11th, of September, because this was a place where we could both go and stay until the other one got there and not be, one of us alone in town for maybe a day or two. The other one could get there. But in the meantime, we had to get papers for our marriage licenses. He got his in the Army in Texas. I got mine in California. You had to have these tests, blood tests and things run that took 3 days. So there was all these holdups, so anyway, Mother and my little brother and I rode the bus to Ogden. And we got there Sunday sometime. And I suppose we went to church with Aunt Sue and Uncle Ray, because I can remember going to church with them sometime, and I don't remember when else it would have been. And you didn't get there till early Monday morning, did you? But on the ferry going home from work, I think it was on Wednesday, 2 friends of ours that had been part of the gang, Betty Shirtliff and Gordon Dean, said they were going to go get married at the Salt Lake Temple at the same time we were. And we were going to have a, quote, double wedding, which you don't have at the temple, but get married at the same time. And so, but there was no way we could get to the temple on Monday. And there was no way, because we had to get a Utah marriage license. And the temple session, the only one you could go through to get married, started at 7 in the morning or thereabouts. And of course the offices where you could get a marriage licenses weren't open yet. But Betty and Gordon had gotten theirs on Friday, I guess. And we tried and tried and tried to call them every chance we got, between getting the marriage license and the other things we had to do. And there were no phone lines open between Ogden and Salt Lake. I'm sorry, unless you've got a military priority, we cannot put your call through. So we got to the Salt Lake Temple the next morning, and we tried to call them then and didn't get any answer, so we didn't know what was going on. But they weren't in that session. But in those days, when you got married in the temple, you went in the temple at 7 o'clock in the morning, had your endowments and everything that day, and it was about 1 o'clock when we got through in the afternoon. But when we got out, Mom and Aunt Sue went with us, and we came down on the Bamberger, because Aunt Sue didn't drive either.
It's a big streetcar.
Yeah, interurban streetcar.
Light rail.
Yeah, light rail. Considered very old-fashioned, and they destroyed all the rails and everything. And then my father's youngest sister, Aunt Priscilla, met us at the temple. And we left Newell in Ogden with the lady across the street from Aunt Sue's house. And so my 2 aunts and my mother and me and he all went through the temple that day. he didn't have anybody to help him through. I don't know. Some worker, I guess, helped you a little bit. Huh? And to do all that in one day was a little mind-boggling. Both of us, our fellow workers at Mare Island, are his fellow servicemen, saying, after you get married, if you're not going to be in a town where your reception's going to be, which they knew we weren't, you got to go out and get drunk before you try to spend the first night together. And so we said, yeah, we'll think about it. But after we'd been in the temple that long, in that spiritual, beautiful setting, that was the least of the things we were interested in doing. But anyway, we finally got through to Gordon's parents, and they found out Betty and Gordon had gotten married on Monday, and they'd spent Monday night in a hotel. And Mom and Aunt Sue stayed with us until we got registered in the Hotel New House. That's the one they imploded about 5 years ago. So they knew we had a room, and then they all went home. And we left a message with Gordon's folks, and the next morning, early, the phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and a voice, and said hello, and a voice said, "Is this Mrs. Knight?" And I almost said, "No, she's in Vallejo." But it was Betty. Then you tell them about the trip home to Vallejo.
So, Grandma's brother and mother and us rode the bus home to Vallejo. And her brother tends to get car sick.
At least he did then.
And Grandma Stanley wanted me to do something about it. Go tell the bus driver to stop. He's going to throw up. And I didn't want to do anything, you know.
But of course he was in uniform.
And you better do it. He's going to throw up all over the place. And so finally I went up and asked the bus driver if he could stop. And so Newell, that's his name, got out and was sick along the highway, and it was okay after that. We proceeded on home.
And when we got home, Mother had arranged to have a reception for us at the church. And when was it? About a day later, you had to go home? He only had a few days off too, and he had to go by train back to Dalhart. Now tell him about the next episode.
Well, Dalhart, Texas is in the Panhandle, and the wind is always blowing. You can stand where you are, ankle deep in mud, with sand blowing in your face from coming from Texas, well, other parts of Texas. Horrible place.
Yeah.
So we
The
got
joke was the sand never touched the ground. That's how come it never got wet.
we had a one-room motel kind of a thing. It didn't even have a bath in it. Yeah, a shower. You had to go to a central bath and shower. We were there for quite a while, and
Several months.
then they transferred me to McCook, Nebraska, to be with a B-29 bombing outfit. Those are bigger bombers.
So from California, you guys went back to Texas together? Okay.
Well, he had to go back to the base. We got married in September. I didn't leave Mare Island until January.
Yeah.
Oh, so Dad, you had to leave after your reception?
Yeah.
And
No,
Mom, you just had to stay
she
home?
stayed.
I stayed
Oh,
there.
that's...
And finally got to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore, so I sent her a telegram and said, "Come on to Texas." So she came out there and joined me in Dalhart.
You're not going to tell him about the 3-day pass.
I arranged to get a 3-day pass, And I found out that there were Navy planes that went from Amarillo, Texas, which was
Not too far.
40 or 50, 60 miles from Dalhart, clear to Oakland, the Navy base there. And you could go to Amarillo and hitch a ride, and boy, you were there and back in California in just a few hours, you know. So I thought I could stretch a 3-day pass into a furlough.
But just in case, he had a 24-hour pass too.
You know, an extra one. And then I left 12 hours early. My boss let me. He was LDS, and so he was a good old Joe. So I had almost a furlough.
What's a furlough, a week?
A week or 2 weeks, a little longer than a pass. Well,
When you're on a pass, the catch is you're not supposed to go any further than so many miles from where you belong. On a
Yeah.
furlough, you could travel.
So we had a good time, and then it came time for me to have to go back to my base there at Dalhart, Texas. And I went over to Oakland there to catch a ride on one of those airplanes. And they were all full. And here I left it till the last minute to catch one, you know. And I tried, and I waited, and I tried, and nothing came up till all of a sudden here was an Army pilot flying a trainer back down. Well, he was going clear down to southern Texas.
That sounded close.
Yeah.
It's closer than
Oh.
California.
1,000 miles. And
Oh.
so I went down there. He'd even let me flew the plane part of the way. And I went down there, got on the train, and was coming back up to Dalhart. And while I was there in Texas at this air base, my furlough pass ran out. And I knew I was in trouble because they have what they call MPs, policemen,
Riding the train.
soldier policemen riding the train.
They're not looking at the scenery either. They're asking.
They check your passes and furloughs and stuff. I don't know whether I should tell you this or not,
Yeah.
but I had had a lot of clerical experience, and I knew how things worked. So I found an office that wasn't locked, and I went in and rummaged through the papers and stuff and found blank passes and made out a couple of them. One for 3 days and another one for the following 3 days because I didn't know how long it was going to take me to get back up to Dalhart. Well, the passes worked and the MPs didn't put me in jail. I finally got home, back to Dalhart, and I came into the office there where my boss was, and he says, "Well, it didn't work, did it?" He was the one that told me about the Navy planes in the first place. So I was a corporal, and they busted me down to a private. So before the war was over, I made it back up to corporal again.
But they didn't put him in the stockade, so.
That's what they would have done. You would have had to go in sort of jail to get caught if you got caught.
Yeah.
Maybe 30 days.
Oh.
But Grandma came to Texas to live with me.
And
then
that took almost an act of Congress to get released from Mare Island.
Then they transferred me up to McCook, Nebraska, with a B-29 outfit for training. There I was part of the bomber group. I wasn't just there on the base to help train them. I went up there and Grandma came up.
Yeah, there was a couple who had a car, and he got permission to drive his car up with his wife and household possessions. And I rode with them. He made arrangements for me to ride with him, and I'd never met them, talking about. But they were nice people. It was a long ride, all the way across Kansas. And when we got there, of course, the first thing we did was hit the place where you went to. They had always in the middle of town where servicemen went to find listings for apartments. And we found 2 motel units in the same motel. It was a good thing because I don't know how he'd have got back and forth from the base, but if he hadn't been able to ride with Doc some of the time, at least to town. And then we finally found an apartment. I mean, this was just a motel room. And they let us cook in them, but they provided to cook on a kerosene stove. So most everything we ate tasted a little bit like kerosene. But we found this apartment, and you had to walk about a mile to catch the bus, didn't you? Because, of course, the B-29 airport has to be out of town because they use such a long runway. And we lived there for several months. And then he got alerted to go overseas, and they were told they were all going to get a furlough, you know, just before they went overseas, and it didn't work. They didn't give them furloughs. So we got tickets for me to go home on the train, and you rode part way with me. Did you go as far as Ogden? And then he had to turn around and go back.
Oh.
And we thought this was going to be the last time we'd see each other until he got home from overseas.
They sent us to Hamilton Field, which is very close to Vallejo. That was our port of embarkation, they called it. And from there, we flew overseas, clear out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean to the island of Tinian.
We had a stopover in Hawaii to gas up.
Yeah. But we were delayed 3 or 4 days, and the first day we said goodbye, and we thought that was it. And then we didn't go. So I made arrangements somehow and got a ride to Vallejo, and
You and Bill both came.
Mahar,
No,
Waymond.
when?
Well, I snuck in the back door of the house there, and here they were all talking and so forth, and I just stepped out in the room and surprised the heck out of them.
I thought I was going to faint. And so then I drove over and stayed with my sister who lived in Mill Valley, which is pretty close to where he was. And he had to report for roll call in the morning, and they'd say, call out their names and say, get on the plane. And I'd wait outside the gates. They wouldn't let me on the base. And I'd wait there until I heard the planes, you know, or saw the planes taking off, and then I'd wait about half an hour longer. And by then, he'd show up if he was going to be able to come. It could take him a while to get a pass, you know, to leave. And he was able to come back once, at least. And then one day, anyhow, I was waiting one day, and I waited, 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 and he didn't come. So I knew he was gone then. And of course, this was in about the 1st of February, and Barbara was born in the middle of June. So I didn't go to work or anything. I just waited for the baby to come at my folks' house.
And you went to work for the dentist, didn't you?
Yeah, when Barbara was 6 weeks old. I went to the dentist to get my teeth taken care of, because in those days, they wouldn't let you go to the dentist when you were pregnant.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and he actually had to pull a tooth because it had gone that long. But while I was sitting in the dentist chair, he asked me what I was doing, and I told him, well, I was going to go see if I could go back to work on Mare Island. But it was after VE Day. That means the war was over in Europe, but they were still fighting in the Pacific. And so they weren't hiring on Mare Island like they had been. And he said, well, can you start work here Monday morning? So I went to work Monday morning for the dentist, and I worked there until after he got home. And as soon as he got home, I quit. But I watched they call it VJ Day, the victory over Japan. I watched the parades from the dentist office. We were in a good spot downtown, Vallejo.
So what did you do out in the Pacific? How long were you there?
I was there about a year.
Yeah, about the 1st of February till Thanksgiving.
I worked as an intelligence specialist, doing what I explained to you. Helping the bomber crews get all prepared to go over and bomb Japan, and we bombed them a number of times. And interestingly enough, their homes, I don't know whether you've ever noticed it in movies or whatever, but they're very fragile kinds of things made out of bamboo and paper.
They lacquer the paper to give it some stability.
And they don't, well, here, let's see, where are we? They had steel mills like we have here in Geneva, but not very many. And a lot of the things that they made, airplane parts and gun parts and so forth, were made in homes, right there in the Japanese people's homes. Well, how do you stop them from manufacturing, from making those kinds of things? It's just real hard. So the war got pretty bad, really, and we were desperate to make sure that the Japanese were conquered. So
They did all kinds of things. I mean, they had what they call kamikaze pilots, and they just turn a plane into a bomb, and the pilot would dive into a vessel, a ship, a Navy ship, one of ours, to try to sink it. And he knew kamikaze is a Japanese word that means suicide. And they were committing suicide, but they were doing it for their country and for their glory.
So in order to put a stop to them making all of these parts so that they could keep on fighting in the war, our planes started dropping different kinds of bombs. They were called,
Was it napalm?
no, they did the same result.
Incendiary?
Incendiary, that means fire bombs. They would drop and hit and burst into flames. And then, of course, that would burn the Japanese homes up. Because they weren't made like your home here. This could be some protection against those fire bombs, but not over there. And many times, and I have pictures that I could show you, those fire bomb raids burned, I mean, a whole large city, a lot larger than Salt Lake, burned half of it, just wipe it out. And so the war, as I say, got pretty nasty. Those firebomb raids were every bit as bad as the atomic bombs. And then, along towards July, August, we could tell that they were running down. They didn't have the gasoline. Here they were using their planes to crash into our ships. So that meant when they did that, that was one less plane, one less pilot. And because I was in intelligence, I got to read all of the secret, super secret stuff. And so I could tell by then that the war wasn't going to take too long to be over.
Except that if we had to send troops in to actually take Japan, like they had to do island by island by island all over the Pacific, they estimated that it would cost somewhere in the vicinity of 2 million of our servicemen to take those islands. Because there's a lot of islands. There isn't just one Japanese island. There's a whole string of them.
They had caves and tunnels and stuff like that in those islands. On one island, Okinawa, the Japanese had 10,000 soldiers, and they were taught that it was shameful. You did not give up. You did not surrender. You fought until you died. By the time we took that island of Okinawa, there were 100 Japanese soldiers left.
Wasn't the plane that dropped the atomic bomb, weren't they practicing on the island you were on or something? Or?
They were part of our group. They came over and joined our 9th bomber group. And then they
took off from his island, but there was a fence. They weren't allowed to go where that atomic bomb was because you had rumors about a secret weapon, but there was always rumors about secret weapons during World War II.
Over in England, in the war over there, they dropped what they called,
The drone?
I mean, they were monstrous bombs.
Oh,
The drones?
I can't, no, this was British planes,
Oh.
blockbusters. And we thought, well, that's what they have here, is some of these big bombs that we're going to bomb Japan with. But it was so much worse and more terrible than that. But
the atomic.
But my
They
grandma,
only made 2 runs, did they?
yeah, they bombed Nagasaki and Hiroshima.
So you were on the island that the atomic bomb was
And
on?
it was one of our planes, 2 of our planes that dropped them. Like Grandma said, they had those islands so fortified that we would have lost several million more of our people, Americans, to take those islands. So President Truman felt far better to use the atomic bomb than to lose a couple of million of our soldiers.
And of course, it was the first time they'd ever been used, and so they didn't know what was going to happen, not really. The scientists predicted what was going to happen, but they didn't know. And the men that were flying those planes really weren't sure they were going to get out of it alive. But one of the things about the Japanese, at least 30 years after the war was over, they would still find an isolated 1 or 2 Japanese soldiers that had been hiding in caves on some of these islands that thought the war was still going on.
I remember stories of that, even in the 70s, I think.
Yeah, they did. I wasn't supposed to have it because I was issued a rifle, but I bought a pistol before I went overseas. So I wanted some more protection. And when I got over there, 3 or 4 of us guys went out to search some of these caves, thinking we could maybe find some Japanese souvenirs. Well, we didn't find any souvenirs, and lucky for us, we didn't find any Japanese, because I sold that pistol to another guy, and a day or 2 later, he went out to one of the caves, and he had to use that pistol to kill 2 or 3 Japanese soldiers who were still hiding out.
And they were probably out of ammunition, or he wouldn't have been able to do that. But finally, the war got over. But to come home, you had to have qualifications that they call points. If you were married and had a child that was born before a certain day, that gave you points. How long you'd been in the service gave you points.
Decorations you'd received, I got several medals.
But the war was over, and so his job wound down. And so he and Bill Wayman, who was an LDS serviceman from Logan, ran the officers' laundry. But the people who did the work in the laundry were Koreans, the girls, who had been brought there by the Japanese as slaves. You know this scandal that's going on now about the Japanese Korean slaves? Yeah. They were some of those girls. And they wanted men to work with these women that they thought they could trust with women. And so these 2 LDS guys that were out of a job, more or less, but didn't have the points to come home, ran the officers' laundry. But that's where Grandpa, we suppose, got exposed to TB, because these Korean girls, a lot of them must have had it. But finally, you got home, what, the day before Thanksgiving?
Yep.
And he was able to come have Thanksgiving dinner with us, but then he had to go back over to someplace else in the Bay Area to get processed out. He had just been given a 24-hour leave. And he finally got processed out the next week.
So, Dad, did you have TB? Did you get TB?
I test positive for it, but no, none of the x-rays ever show it.
What were the medals you got? What were they for?
Oh, citations that your whole group got, your squadron got.
Or some of these bombings and things that they did, you know.
Wasn't anything I did. Well, I guess I did play a part of it.
Sure was a team.
Yeah. It had to be a good team.
When he first went in the service, they tried to talk him into being a tail gunner on a B-17.
Yeah.
And if he'd have accepted it, I mean, he was a marksman. You know, your dad's a good shot. He was a marksman, and because he was such a good shot, they wanted him to go over to Europe and do that. And he would have got there just as they started that daylight bombing in Germany.
That's what some neighbors, her dad was a tail gunner over in Europe.
Mm.
He had to crawl into this little space.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, it has.
It's getting kind of late. We better.
Yeah, after 9.
Hey, this is